I'm Rachel Porter, 34 years old, and nothing prepares you for the day your parents look you in the eye and tell you the family needs your daughter's life savings more than she does. The air in the kitchen was heavy with the smell of fresh coffee, the morning sun creeping across the counter, and my hands trembling as I stared at the statement on my laptop. My father's voice, usually gentle, sounded strange and far away, as if he were speaking through a closed door. My mother just stood there, her face pale, fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. I could hear Emily in the living room humming to herself, completely unaware that the ground beneath our feet had just shifted. That was the moment I realized the trust holding us together had been quietly unraveling for years, and I just hadn't seen it. Before I take you any further, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and if you've ever faced a crossroads with family. Tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of our story. I was raised in West Haven, a quiet town where neighbors knew each other by name, and the front porch light was always left on for friends. My parents, Darlene and Stanley, taught me to believe in hard work and honesty, the kind of values that linger in the way you greet someone at the grocery store or say grace at Sunday dinner. Being the only daughter sandwiched between an older brother, Greg, and a house full of expectations, I grew up learning to take care of others and never ask for much in return. After college, I married Michael, and we built a little life together until it all fell apart. When Emily was born, I poured everything I had into giving her a sense of safety, even as I worked long hours as a real estate agent. My parents stepped in whenever they could, babysitting on weekends, dropping off casseroles, showing up for recitals. We might not have had a lot, but what we had felt solid, like the porch swing my dad built from old cedar planks the summer I turned 10. But life has a way of testing every foundation. Sometimes it's a diagnosis, a job loss, or a quiet conversation that leaves you suddenly unsure of your footing. That morning, with the sunlight warming my shoulders and my parents standing in front of me, I realized nothing about our family was as safe or certain as I believed. And somewhere down the hall, Emily's laughter drifted in sweet and unbroken, a sound I clung to even as the rest of my world seemed to tilt. That morning clung to me for the rest of the week. Even as I went about the routines, packing Emily's lunch, answering real estate calls, walking through homes with clients, my mind kept circling back to the kitchen, to the way my parents had stood so quietly after delivering their news. It felt like something fragile had cracked, though I was still pretending it hadn't. I tried to convince myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe a mix-up with the bank, maybe a temporary borrowing, maybe anything other than what it looked like. I found myself waking early, sitting at my desk with stacks of bills and bank statements, combing through the numbers, searching for sense where there was none. The silence between me and my parents grew heavier, broken only by quick exchanges about Emily or the weather. They seemed to avoid my eyes, especially my father, whose hands always fidgeted now when he came by. Emily remained blissfully untouched. She wore her favorite yellow sweater and spent afternoons dancing in the living room or building elaborate forts out of couch cushions. Sometimes I'd catch her humming, her little voice echoing down the hallway, and for a moment I would almost forget the storm gathering just outside her world. One evening after Emily had gone to bed, I invited my parents to sit down at the kitchen table. My mother perched on the edge of her chair, and my father folded his arms, looking everywhere but at me. I placed the printed bank statement between us, my own name, their names, and the withdrawal figures circled in blue ink. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did the withdrawal slip signed in my mother's careful handwriting. "Can you explain this?" My voice was low, almost a whisper. My mother pressed her lips together, blinking hard. My father's jaw tensed. "It was just a loan," he finally said, "for family." He didn't look sorry, just tired. "We had to help Greg. He's in a mess, Rachel." "It was urgent," my mother added quickly. "We were always going to put it back. We just needed more time." The room felt smaller, like the walls were drawing in. I tried to keep my tone even. That was Emily's fund, for her treatments. My father shrugged as if it were a matter of priorities. "Greg needed us. He was in trouble. The family comes first." I wanted to scream, but instead I sat perfectly still, holding the statement between us, as if it could shield me from the enormity of what they'd done. "You chose Greg over Emily?" My mother's hands trembled as she reached for mine, but I pulled away. It wasn't about choosing, she insisted, her voice breaking. It was about family. But the word had never sounded so hollow. That night after they left, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and Emily's quiet breathing through the baby monitor. I opened my laptop, scrolled through more records, and started to see the pattern transfers, small and large, always funneling back to Greg. My parents had been bailing him out for years. I thought about all the times I'd cut back, scrimped, and saved to put a few extra dollars away for Emily's care, while my brother bounced from crisis to crisis, always landing softly in the safety net my parents provided. I called my brother the next afternoon. He answered on the third ring, his voice casual. "Hey, Rach, I didn't waste time." "Greg, did you ask Mom and Dad to take Emily's treatment money?" There was a pause, then a huff. "It wasn't like that. I needed help." "Yeah, but they offered. I didn't tell them where to get it." He sounded annoyed, as if the whole thing was an inconvenience to him. "You could have said no." I managed, my hands shaking. It was for Emily's medical care. He scoffed. "She's got insurance, right? You'll figure it out, you always do." I hung up numb. The conversation left a bitter taste I couldn't wash away. The following days blurred together. My parents stopped coming by, and when I called, my mother's voice was clipped and formal. My father barely spoke. Greg texted a few times, but I didn't answer. At night, I stared at the ceiling, running through memories, birthday cakes, soccer games, Sunday dinners, wondering how we'd ever gotten here. I felt as if I was living in someone else's story, waiting for the next chapter to reveal whether things would fall apart or come together. I began to notice small changes in Emily, too. She seemed to sense my distraction, clinging a little tighter at bedtime, watching me closely as I went about the house. "Is Grandma mad at you?" she asked one night, her eyes wide and serious. I smoothed her hair and tucked her in, careful to keep my voice steady. "No, honey. Grown-ups just have some things to work out." She nodded, accepting it in the way only a child can, and soon drifted off to sleep. The weight of the secret pressed on me heavier each day. Even my work felt different. Houses that once seemed warm and welcoming now felt empty and echoing. I went through the motions, but the joy I used to find in helping families start fresh was fading. I wondered if there was a way to fix what had broken, or if the best I could do was pick up the pieces and try to protect what mattered most. One morning, as I watched Emily chase the school bus down the driveway, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, I made a promise to myself. I would find a way forward for her, whatever it took, even if it meant letting go of the family I'd always known. And as the bus turned the corner, taking Emily out of sight, I knew the next chapter was about to begin. The days that followed were quieter than any I could remember. Even with Emily's laughter filling the house or the television droning in the background, something essential was missing. The space between each heartbeat felt stretched and thin, as if I were living behind glass, unable to touch anything real. I went through my routines, packing lunches, folding laundry, showing homes, while a silent ache sat heavy inside my chest. At first, I tried to fill the emptiness with busyness. I dove into work, adding new listings, taking on clients that other agents passed by. I told myself if I just kept moving, maybe the ground would stop shifting under my feet. Yet each night as I tucked Emily into bed, I would pause at her doorway, listening to the small, steady rhythm of her breathing, and wish for a world where her innocence would stay untouched by everything that was happening around us. I started avoiding my parents' calls, letting them roll to voicemail. When I did answer, the conversation stayed shallow. "How's Emily? How's work? Did you get enough rest?" But there was always a pause, always the sense of words left unsaid. Once my father stopped by dropping off a bag of groceries. He set them on the counter, gave a gruff reminder to take care of yourself, and left before I could even thank him. The air he left behind felt colder somehow. Greg, on the other hand, seemed to disappear. I didn't see his name pop up on my phone, didn't hear from Lauren, didn't catch a glimpse of his car on my street. Sometimes I caught myself staring at the driveway, half expecting him to walk up with a sheepish grin and some half-hearted apology. But all that ever came were credit card bills and reminders of money lost. One Sunday afternoon, Emily came home from a play date at Martha Lawson's house. She handed me a drawing, a wobbly picture of our family, everyone holding hands, even Greg stick-thin and smiling right in the middle. I tried to keep my voice light as I praised her work, but my heart ached at what the drawing represented. To Emily, nothing had changed. She still believed family meant togetherness, even as mine was quietly coming apart at the seams. Around that time, I noticed changes in my parents, too. My mother's voice on the phone sounded strained, brittle, as if each word cost her something. When I stopped by to pick up Emily after school, she pressed leftovers into my hands but wouldn't meet my eyes. My father, once quick with a joke or a story, spoke less and less. The weight of what we'd lost hung between us, growing heavier by the day. I tried to keep things normal for Emily. We baked cookies, walked to the park, built forts in the living room. She started asking more questions at bedtime about families, about promises, about whether people could be forgiven if they made a really big mistake. I answered as honestly as I could without burdening her with the details. Some nights I caught myself watching her sleep, brushing stray curls from her forehead, grateful for the small grace of her peace. Work grew harder. I found myself distracted during showings, fumbling over details I once recited by heart. Clients asked if I was all right, and I always smiled, always reassured them. I was just busy, just tired, just one more project away from balance. Only when I got home did the exhaustion settle in, thick and unyielding, making the house feel emptier than ever. One Friday, as the sun dipped below the rooftops and the sky turned the color of old denim, I sat at my kitchen table and started writing a letter to my parents. I wasn't sure if I'd send it. I wrote about my hurt, my confusion, the sense of betrayal that wouldn't let me rest. The words came out slow, measured, steady, as if writing them might make the pain easier to bear. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of my desk drawer. That same weekend, Emily was invited to a sleepover at Mrs. Ritter's house. As I watched her pack her favorite pajamas and stuffed bear, I realized how much she was growing up, how quickly the years were passing. When I dropped her off, Mrs. Ritter squeezed my hand and said, "If you ever need anything, Rachel, just call." Her kindness reminded me that not every bond in life had to be broken by disappointment. That night, alone in the house for the first time in months, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood outside. I could see the glow from Martha's porch across the street, hear the distant laughter from the Sullivan family's backyard. The world kept moving, even if my own life felt paused. As the week wore on, my mother left a message saying she'd like to see Emily. Just for a few hours, she said, voice shaky. I agreed, more for Emily's sake than anything else. When I dropped her off, my mother gave me a long hug, the kind she used to give when I was little. "We love you, Rachel," she whispered. I nodded, but said nothing. Later, Emily told me about her afternoon, how Grandma made her favorite soup, how Grandpa read her the same story 3 times in a row. She smiled as she recounted it, the memory softening something inside me. Maybe I thought there was still a path forward, though I had no idea what it looked like. By the end of that month, I realized I was learning to live with the ache, letting it settle into the background, like a dull ache after a long day. The betrayal hadn't disappeared, but neither had the memories of the good years, the birthdays, the late-night talks, the small kindnesses that still echoed through the house. One evening, as I closed Emily's bedroom door and stood in the hallway, I allowed myself to hope that we might all find our way back someday in some way. But I also knew things would never be quite the same. The silence had changed us, left a mark that would not fade easily. As fall turned the maple leaves in our yard to gold and red, I gathered Emily's backpack and prepared for the next day. There was work to do, meals to make, a child to raise. The world outside moved steadily on, and so quietly did we. In the hush before bedtime, I found myself ready, if only barely, for whatever the next chapter would bring. The leaves had just begun to turn their edges brushed with gold and rust when the first real change crept into our days. After weeks of moving through life like a shadow, something inside me started to shift. One evening, as Emily finished her homework at the kitchen table and the sun poured a soft, honeyed light through the window, I stood at the counter and watched her draw shapes across the page. Her head was bent low, lips moving as she sounded out words, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the tightness in my chest eased just a little. A few days later, I drove Emily to her dance class and found myself waiting outside with the other mothers. Their conversations hummed around me: school schedules, soccer games, the best place to buy school shoes. I caught snippets of their laughter, felt the gentle pull of belonging. For months, I'd felt set apart, as if my world had been carved out by something only I could see. But that afternoon, standing in the crisp fall air, I felt the distance shrink just a bit. That night, as I tucked Emily into bed, she asked Mom, "Are you okay?" Her small hand found mine beneath the quilt, her eyes round and searching. I squeezed her fingers. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Some days are harder than others, but I'm okay." She nodded her trust, as simple and absolute as the stars outside her window. The next morning, I took a walk through our neighborhood. I passed Martha Lawson's house, her porch lined with pumpkins, and waved to Mrs. Ritter as she raked leaves into neat orange piles. The familiar faces, the gentle rhythm of the street reminded me how much goodness there still was all around us. On a whim, I stopped at the corner cafe and bought myself a coffee, sitting near the window, just to watch the world go by. At work, I took on a new client, a single father recently moved from Chicago, searching for a home where his daughter could feel safe. We spent hours touring open houses, talking about schools and commutes, and what it meant to start over in a new place. Something about his steady manner, the way he spoke of hope for his little girl, sparked a memory of the person I used to be. Bit by bit, I felt myself standing a little straighter, my voice regaining its steadiness. The changes were quiet, almost imperceptible. I started calling my parents again, answering when my mother's number lit up the phone. Our conversations were careful at first, each of us testing the water, but over time, a tentative warmth crept back in. My father would ask about Emily's grades, or whether I'd gotten the furnace checked before winter. He didn't apologize, not directly, but he listened in a way he hadn't for a long while. One Saturday, as Emily helped me carry groceries in from the car, she spotted my father's old chess set on the top shelf of the hall closet. "Will you teach me to play Mom?" she asked, and I nodded, setting up the pieces on the dining room table. As we played, she giggled over the horsey moves and made up stories about the little wooden queen. The sound of her laughter filled the house the way it once did, and for a moment, it felt like a piece of our old life had returned. Greg's absence lingered in the background, but I found myself thinking of him less often. When his name came up, I let the conversation pass. It was as if the energy I'd spent on old hurts was quietly being reclaimed, invested now in the life Emily and I were building for ourselves. Even my mother seemed to sense the change. One evening, she called to say she was making her pot roast for Sunday dinner, just like she used to, and hoped we would come. That weekend, as we sat around my parents' table, the food warm and familiar, I looked at each face, my mother's tired but gentle smile, my father's careful questions, Emily's joy as she described her dance class, and realized how much could be mended if we moved forward one small kindness at a time. The wounds weren't gone, not by any means, but something softer had settled over us, a quiet willingness to try again. When I walked Emily home in the cool night air, she slipped her hand into mine and said, "I like it when we're all together." Her words lingered in the space between us, full of hope and the promise of new beginnings. As the weeks turned, I found myself rising earlier, taking time to breathe before the day's rush began. I started journaling in the quiet hours before sunrise, jotting down small blessings: Emily's new dance shoes, a neighbor's kind wave, a hot mug of tea on a chilly morning. Each entry was a reminder that even in the aftermath of betrayal, life could offer unexpected moments of peace. With the holidays on the horizon, I felt a cautious optimism blooming inside me. There were still hard days moments when the weight of the past pressed in, but they no longer defined every hour. Emily's laughter, the steady routine of our days, and the support of friends and neighbors began to knit something whole where there had been only fracture. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something sturdier, a sense that we could face whatever came next together. And as the first snow dusted the rooftops in our neighborhood, I knew that a new chapter was waiting just beyond the frost-touched windows. Continuing from the gentle promise of a new beginning, The days in our small house began to take on a kind of hopeful rhythm. Snow drifted down in soft veils outside the windows, turning the streets and rooftops into something bright and hushed. Each morning I woke to the sound of Emily's feet on the hallway floor, her laughter rising with the sun as she tugged on her boots and scarf, eager to greet the day. One Saturday, while Emily was at Martha Lawson's for a sleepover, I decided to tackle the boxes stacked in the back of my closet. They held scraps of a life I'd almost forgotten, old photographs, birthday cards, faded receipts from happier times. As I sorted through the memories, I felt the old ache start to rise, but this time it didn't overwhelm me. Instead, I found myself piecing together the story of how far we'd come. Each faded picture, each scribbled note reminded me that Emily and I had built something real out of the broken pieces. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice softer than usual. "We're making chili tonight," she said, the kind you and Greg always liked. "I thought maybe you and Emily could come by." I hesitated only a moment before agreeing, a quiet understanding passing between us. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. The air in my parents' kitchen was warm, heavy, with the scent of onions and spices. Emily darted between the table and the living room carrying bowls and napkins, her cheeks flushed from the cold. My father set out the good dishes, humming along to the oldies on the radio, while my mother stirred the pot and told Emily stories about my own childhood winters. After dinner, as snow began to fall again, my father brought out the chess set. He and Emily played a game, their heads bent close together, the old board between them. I watched from the doorway, a mug of tea warming my hands, and realized I couldn't remember the last time our family had felt so whole. The words "I'm sorry" were never spoken, but the tenderness in my father's touch and the way my mother brushed a crumb from Emily's hair said what needed saying. Late that evening, as Emily dozed in the back seat on the drive home, I thought about the ways forgiveness sometimes moved in quiet, invisible steps. No one had erased the past, but we were building something new, one meal, one game, one small act of kindness at a time. At work, too, the days shifted. My new client, Mr. Bryant, had finally found the house he wanted, a sturdy place with a backyard big enough for his daughter to run wild in the spring. On closing day, he handed me a card and a tin of homemade cookies. "You made this easier than I expected," he said, "and I'm grateful." His words lingered long after I'd said goodbye, a small reminder that helping others start fresh could help me do the same. Emily's world brightened. She brought home crayon drawings of families, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes all four of us, sometimes including Martha, Mrs. Ritter, even the cat next door. She invited her grandparents to her school's winter concert, and for the first time in months, they sat together in the front row, their faces proud and open. With the new year approaching, I felt a cautious sense of hope. There were still difficult days, moments when old wounds tugged at me, or when I'd hear Greg's name mentioned and feel a flicker of resentment, but they no longer shaped the entire landscape of my heart. I'd learned to give space to both hurt and healing. One evening, as Emily and I baked cookies for the neighbors, she looked up at me with flour dusted on her cheeks and asked, "Mom, are we happy now?" The question caught me off guard. I knelt beside her, wrapped her in a hug, and whispered, "We're getting there, sweetheart. One day at a time." The next Sunday, we returned to my parents' house for dinner. Greg's absence still left an empty chair, but the laughter that filled the kitchen seemed stronger than the silence he left behind. My mother pressed an envelope into my hand before we left. Inside was a recipe card written in her careful, looping script. "I thought you might want to make the chili at home," she said, her eyes gentle and full of something I couldn't quite name. That night, after Emily was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table tracing the lines of my mother's handwriting. I realized that while forgiveness hadn't come all at once, it was quietly settling in, working its way through each of us. The pain of betrayal lingered, but so did the promise of something better, a future shaped not by the mistakes behind us, but by the choices we were making now. As the wind rattled the windows and the house settled around me, I understood that this was what resilience looked like. Not a single grand gesture, but 100 small ones. A meal shared, a phone call, answered a story told over cocoa in the quiet of a winter's night. and as the snow fell softly outside, blanketing the world in silence, I found myself ready to move forward one gentle step at a time. The winter pressed on, and the world outside felt quieter, muffled beneath layers of snow. Inside our small home, change moved in slow, certain steps. Emily's drawings crowded the refrigerator door, and every time I walked by, I traced her crooked hearts with my eyes, reminded of how far we'd come since those hard autumn days. That week I was busier than usual at work. Mr. Bryant called with questions about home insurance, and the phone seemed to ring just as I finished brewing my morning coffee. Still, I was grateful for the distraction. It kept me focused and moving forward, even when old worries wanted to tug me back. The rhythm of real estate contract signatures keys handed over became a kind of reassurance. Each closing felt like a small victory, a chance to put something right in the world, even if it wasn't my own. One afternoon, as Emily sat hunched over her homework at the kitchen table, the phone rang again. This time it was Greg's mother. Her voice was hesitant. "I thought maybe Emily could come over for dinner," she said. There was no talk of Greg, no mention of the past few months. Just a quiet invitation, uncertain but genuine. When I told Emily, she glanced up from her math sheet, searching my face for some clue. "Do you want to go, honey?" I asked. She nodded after a moment, a little smile breaking through her worry. "I think so, Mom. Grandma said she misses me." That evening I dropped Emily at the familiar gray house with the peeling porch swing. I watched from the curb as Greg's mother opened the door, her arms wide and trembling. For a heartbeat, I remembered every Thanksgiving spent at that table, the sound of Greg's laugh in the hallway, the smell of cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning. Now the air between us was different, fragile, cautious, but not entirely closed. I drove home with the radio low headlights gliding across the icy streets. The house felt emptier without Emily's chatter, but I let the silence settle around me. For the first time in a while, I realized I didn't feel afraid. I wasn't waiting for Greg's shadow to fall across the door. I was just waiting for my daughter to come home. Emily returned a little after 8, cheeks rosy, clutching a napkin full of chocolate chip cookies. She told me about Grandma's new cat, about the puzzle they finished together. She didn't mention Greg. I didn't ask. It was enough that she came back smiling, humming under her breath as she brushed her teeth. On Saturday, Emily and I bundled up and walked to the park. The world sparkled, every tree outlined in frost. We watched as 2 boys tried to build a snow fort, their laughter drifting on the cold air. Emily knelt down and began rolling a snowball. I joined her, and soon we had a lopsided snowman with a crooked stick for an arm and my old knit scarf knotted at his neck. As we worked, I noticed Mrs. Ritter waving from her front porch. She called out, "Looks like you 2 are building a masterpiece." Her warmth was steady no matter the weather. Later, she invited us inside for cocoa. Emily sat by her fireplace, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, as Mrs. Ritter asked her about school and favorite books. The quiet kindness of neighbors, the easy welcome felt like a balm. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table paying bills and sorting mail when I noticed an envelope tucked between utility statements. The handwriting on the front was careful, almost old-fashioned. Inside was a note from my father. It was short, just a few lines about the chili recipe, a reminder to keep it simple, and a wish that Emily and I might join them again soon. I thought about the walls that had gone up between us in the past year. There had been so many words left unsaid, so many moments where pride and disappointment filled the room. But now there were small gestures, an invitation, a note, a shared meal that chipped away at the old distance. Sunday came, and Emily and I returned to my parents' house for dinner. The house was alive with the scent of roast chicken and fresh bread. My mother greeted Emily with a hug, pressing a new hair ribbon into her hand. My father winked as he set extra chairs at the table. This time, the silence that sometimes sat between us had softened. Stories were told, laughter echoed from the kitchen, and Emily joined in easily, her voice light and clear. After dinner, we lingered in the living room, watching the snow drift outside. My father pulled out a deck of cards, challenging Emily to a game of Go Fish. My mother pressed coffee into my hands and settled beside me on the couch. "You're doing a good job, Abby," she said quietly, her hand resting on my arm. "Emily is lucky to have you." Her words caught me off guard. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. It was the first real acknowledgement of the struggle I'd carried alone. I understood in that small moment that healing sometimes looked like this: small truths spoken quietly in the safety of home. That night, back in our own house, Emily fell asleep quickly, the day's laughter still lingering in her dreams. I stayed up folding laundry and thinking about all the ways life had begun to mend. It wasn't perfect. I still missed things I'd lost. But I could feel the foundation of our family growing stronger brick by careful brick. There would be more challenges ahead. I knew the past could not be erased by a few dinners or kind words. But the weight of old hurts had begun to lift, replaced by something like hope. As I turned off the lights, I caught sight of Emily's newest drawing taped to the refrigerator, a picture of our family standing beneath a sky full of stars. We were all there, not whole in the way we once were, but together in a new way, braver and more honest than before. And with that, I understood that we were not just surviving, but beginning to live again. The days grew longer, sunlight slipping through our windows before I even set the coffee pot to brew. Emily seemed lighter now, her laughter finding its way back, ringing through our home like the old days. There was still a quiet tension when she spoke about school or friends, but it no longer wrapped itself around her every word. In the evenings, she read out loud on the couch, and I listened to her voice steady and growing stronger with every page. One Friday afternoon, Emily brought home a permission slip for the school art fair. She was nervous, twisting the paper in her hands as she sat at the kitchen table. "Mom, do you think anyone will want to see my paintings?" she asked. I knelt beside her, smoothing the creases from her fingers. "People will want to see what you've made, sweetheart. They always do." Her eyes searched mine for truth, and after a moment she let out a long breath. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." We spent the weekend prepping, gathering Emily's drawings and paintings, hunting for spare frames in the attic, and taping her favorite pieces to the living room wall to help her decide which to bring. Each image was a piece of her journey: a sunrise with bold, hopeful colors, a stormy sky from the winter that had nearly broken us, a portrait of our family with hands held tight even when the faces looked uncertain. Watching her sort through her work, I saw the story of our lives spread out in paint and pencil. It was beautiful and honest, full of scars and hope. On the day of the fair, the gym was full of nervous parents and clusters of kids bustling around display boards. Emily clung to my side at first, but as her classmates arrived, she stepped forward and began arranging her paintings on the easel. I hung back, letting her take the lead. Teachers and parents stopped by, admiring her work. Mrs. Allen, her art teacher, leaned in close. "You've got a real gift, Emily," she said softly. "You see the world in colors most people miss." Greg showed up too. He looked thinner than I remembered, his eyes a little older. He moved carefully through the crowd, hands shoved in his pockets. When he finally reached our corner, he nodded at Emily. "You did good, kid," he said. She nodded back, not meeting his eyes, but she didn't shy away either. After a moment, he turned to me. "Abby, I know I haven't been around. I'd like to help if I can." His words hung between us, heavy and uncertain, but there was a hint of something different in his voice, a humility I'd rarely heard before. I thanked him, not making any promises. Emily was watching, and I wanted her to see that forgiveness could be slow-earned and never automatic. We stood together for a few minutes, quietly, looking at her paintings. The silence comfortable for the first time in years. After the fair, Emily and I stopped for ice cream, sitting in the warmth of the late afternoon sun. She talked about her favorite parts of the day: Mrs. Allen's praise, a friend who wanted to trade drawings, even the bravery it took to let her dad stand in front of her work. "Do you think things will ever go back to how they were?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft. I shook my head. "I think they'll be different, honey, but sometimes different is better." When we got home, there was a letter in the mailbox with my name in my father's neat handwriting. Inside was a check enough to cover the cost of Emily's summer camp and a note: "No conditions. I want to help." My hand shook a little as I read it. The gesture wasn't just money, it was an apology, an olive branch, a quiet invitation to try again. That night, I called my father. The conversation was slow but honest. We talked about Emily, about the garden he was planting, about the stubbornness that ran through both our veins. He didn't say he was sorry, not directly, but his questions were gentle. He asked about the art fair, about what Emily wanted for her birthday, about whether I still made his favorite chili. For the first time in a long while, I felt like his daughter, not just someone carrying a burden he couldn't see. Emily's birthday came the next week. The house was filled with laughter, my parents. Mrs. Ritter, even Greg, all gathered around the kitchen table. Emily blew out her candles, eyes shining, surrounded by people who loved her in ways both quiet and bold. When I caught my mother watching Emily, her eyes were damp, her smile proud. She squeezed my hand onto the table, and I squeezed back, grateful for second chances and the simple joy of family. As the evening wound down and the dishes were cleared, I looked around our little home. It was far from perfect, but it was ours, rebuilt on honesty, forgiveness, and a stubborn hope that had carried us through the worst days. There was still healing to do, wounds that would take time to mend. But that night, as I tucked Emily in, I promised myself to keep moving forward, to keep reaching for kindness, even when it felt hard. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt open, a door quietly swinging wide, inviting us to step into whatever might come next. In the weeks that followed, our days settled into a gentle rhythm that felt both new and familiar. The house held more laughter, and the shadows that once lingered in quiet corners slowly faded. Emily's confidence grew with each small victory. Her artwork hanging in the hallway, an invitation from a friend, her voice steady when she answered the phone. I watched her move through the world with a quiet strength, and I knew she was learning that love could be rebuilt even when the cracks ran deep. My father started visiting more often, always bringing something small, fresh bread from the bakery, a handful of flowers, or a story from his childhood. He never spoke directly about the hurt between us, but in the way he lingered over Emily's drawings or asked about her favorite books, I felt his effort to mend what had been broken. My mother too softened, asking about my work and joining us for walks in the park. The distance between us closed a little more each time, until one day, sitting together at the kitchen table, she reached for my hand and held it without a word. Greg kept his promise to show up, and while the road to forgiveness was slow, Emily found her own way to let him in again. They built something new, quieter, more cautious, but real. Sometimes I'd find the two of them sitting on the porch, her sketchbook balanced on her knees, Greg listening while she talked about dreams for the future. Those moments were small, but they mattered. As spring gave way to summer, I found myself reflecting on all we'd been through, the anger, the grief, the slow, stubborn hope that carried us forward. I realized that justice wasn't always a grand gesture or a courtroom scene. Sometimes it looked like choosing to stand up for yourself, even when your voice shook. Other times, it was the simple act of opening your door to someone who had hurt you and giving them the chance to try again. The pain we lived through didn't disappear, but it changed us. It taught me the quiet power of resilience, the dignity in telling the truth, and the grace that comes with forgiveness. Our family wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in that honesty, we found something better than perfection. We found peace. If you've ever had to fight for your own worth or rebuild after being let down by those you trusted, I hope our story brings you comfort. Sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the strongest places. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts below, or have you join our little community. Your voice matters here.